Welcome back to the second part of zero bone loss concepts. And now we're gonna discuss how to keep the bone stable. First, in the first part, we talked about factors which are important to develop, biological factors and implant design factors. Now that's not all. Now we're gonna discuss, okay, how from prosthetic point of view, what we need to keep in mind in order to keep that bone stability. And after the lecture, we still will have some time. I'm gonna take some questions, we'll see about the time. So if you want to ask me something, think about it and then you will be able to do that. When we talk about prosthetics, of course, we have additional partner in our team. It's a lab technician. And without good lab technician, to get zero bone loss crowns and to get that stability is really very difficult or impossible. So I want to dedicate this short video to all lab technicians who really work hard and make our life as prosthodontists much, much easier and better. So what does good lab technician mean?
It's dramatic. We're not going to make it. We'll never see the light again. But I will keep on going till the end. Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Our ship has faced a hurricane, but I will keep on going.
Whoa. So the first thing we do today after the lecture, we pick up the phone and call our technicians to say thank you, yes? What, from prosthetic point of view, we need to know to talk about bone stability? I'll talk about two things because, of course, of limited of time. We'll talk about how emergence profile or thigh base height influences crestal bone stability, and later we'll talk about influence of material for crestal bone stability. So from emergence profile of the restoration, what we need to know that, of course, it's not, it's made again in different components. This part is responsible for soft tissue stability, like prevention of recession. However, for crestal bone stability, thigh base height, thigh base shape is crucial. For example, thigh base height may not prevent recession, yes, but it may really prevent crestal bone loss. And here I want to show again the research which we just published this week, which we did with NucleOSS. It's, I think, a very big step in order to understand factors for crestal bone stability. What is usually the problem? The problem is that we do not know the exact height of titanium base, which guarantees us crestal bone stability. So, for example, here, you can have bone stability with 3 millimeter thigh base height. You can have it with 1.5 millimeter height. And even this, when I remember I posted this X-ray with 0.6 millimeter height from NucleOSS, and people start to write to me, it's impossible. How can you have implant placed in that position, subcrestally, have this low thigh base, and still have that bone stability? And it's really very easy if you understand all the sequence. So that's the point, that in different situations, we might require different thigh base height. And especially in here, as I said, sounds like impossible, looks like impossible according to the current understanding and current dogmas, that having this low thigh base like here should have bone loss. This implant should have bone loss, but yet it doesn't. That was the idea for clinical study, which we started doing 4 years ago. If you look now on the current recommendations, the standing recommendation is magic number 2. Like if you have less than 2 millimeters thigh base height, it means you're gonna have bone loss. I completely disagree with that. And those cases which I showed, actually with 0.6 millimeter thigh base, it's possible to have bone stability, only you need to understand how to do that. So from my understanding, that there is no really a lot of evidence which supports that you would always need something 2 millimeters or higher thigh base. What is the evidence for this? Because there is always some evidence must come from somewhere. This is the first paper which talked about thigh base height, abutment gingival height, and it's very good. I mean, this paper really introduced us this factor of transmucosal abutment height. I think it's very important. When they looked at all the implants included in the study, you can see that they had significantly less bone loss around lower thigh base, around higher thigh bases compared to the lower thigh bases. That's why they made the conclusion that you need to have at least 2 millimeters in height. The weakness of the study is that it's retrospective design. What does it mean? It means that we do not know how the implant was placed in that study, because maybe it's placed at the level of the bone, so that's one situation. If the implant is placed below the bone, that's completely different situation. And maybe there was profiling done that changed the situation as well. So all that information was not really available, because retrospectively you always look just what patient comes and you just examine the fact. This is a really nice example to show what I mean. Now look, these are the same implants restored with the same height of thigh base. When the implant is placed at the level of the bone, so the same height thigh base has no bone loss. Now I just submerge that implant deeper, place the same thigh base, and suddenly this implant has bone loss. So it's not actually thigh base height, it's actually position of the implant. That's what we should first of all look when we are selecting the thigh base height. How deep is my implant? Because for this implant, if I would just use a higher thigh base, I would have no bone loss. But for this implant, low thigh base is as good, because the implant is placed at the level of the bone. So those ideas, also supporting by the things we had in the past. For example, so this is one of the first studies we did 10 or more years ago. And in this situation, we were using provisional cylinders because Straumann did not have variable base in 2009. And that cylinder height was 1 millimeter. So it means, again, this is impossible if you say that tie base height must be at least 2 millimeters. Another study where we compared, again, different implants and different abutment heights, we had 0.8 millimeter tie base height. Still, look at the bone stability. Still successful. So that leads me to the conclusion that actually there is no sufficient evidence in the literature to state that you must always have 2 millimeter height tie base. It may vary according to the clinical situation. That gives me an idea to make this clinical study, to study influence of T-based gingival height of bone stability around crestally placed implants in thick burr type. And we did the study with NucleOSS implants. I liked it because they had different heights. So they had 0.8 millimeters and 2.4, so really different height. It means that the height, if the height is important, it will clearly show, because it's not just 1 millimeter and 1.5 millimeter, too small difference. Here we had a very big difference between tie base heights, and if I'm using those in the identical clinical situations, then I can really test, is tie base height important or not? That's why we created this inclusion criteria. As I said, some might think that studies are always best case scenarios. You would be right, but that is done on purpose. Because only by getting the ideal situation, we exclude other factors and we can research the factor which we want. That's why I included thick vertical tissues. So if the patient has thin tissues, I cannot work with that patient in the study because it has confounding factor. Epicrestal implant placement, it means equally with the bone. Why? I need to place all my implants at the same level, again, to exclude this confounding factor. Because remember, if I just place implant a little bit deeper and I put small tie base, I will crush the bone. So all the implants must be placed at the same level. And of course, I'm selecting the implant, which is good for zero bone loss concepts because it really has all the features which we talked about. Platinum switching, no polished surface. And in this case, we were using NucleOSS. Now, just to illustrate clinical situation, this is how we measure tissue thickness, and this is how I recommend to do it. Not intraorally, but you just, when you do CBCT scan, put some lip retractor for the patient that the cheeks and tongue would be distracted from the jaws, and that's why you can clearly measure tissue thickness vertically. So all my treatment planning begins from this measurement, and then I know how I can place my implant, the depth. We did this study 2018, we started. So at that time, remember, I was still thinking that 3 millimeters is completely okay. Now I would say that I need 4. So today, in this case, I would place implant 1 millimeter below the bone, and that's all. That's how we get 4 millimeters. But back then, 5 years ago, 3 millimeters was still, this threshold between thin and thick. That's why we included those patients. So osteotomy, placing of the implant, you place the shoulder below the bone. That, of course, the connection would be at the level of the bone. So not supracrestally, but all the implant is placed equally with the bone. Yeah, I'm talking about this part, so you know the shoulder must be in the bone. It looks like subcrestal, but it actually, we are judging from the connection position, right? Like here. So connection is equally with the bone level. That's why it's epicrestally placed equally with the bone. Then healing abutments and one-stage surgery. And then just full zirconia contour restorations restored. And then I just really followed the X-rays after healing, 1 year follow-up. And at that time, so part of the implants received this 2.4 millimeter high thigh base, higher thigh base, and another part of the implants received lower thigh base. So this is called clean study, when you do everything the same except part of the implants had low thigh base and part of the implants, half of the other implants, were having low thigh base. And the results. So for example, again, you can see here, low thigh base, no bone loss. 0.8 millimeter thigh base, a very short one, which is considered not possible to use. You can have bone stability with that as well. Also, with the high thigh bases, we had some cases, a little bit of bone loss, in some other cases, no bone loss at all. So that's why you, again, need to have sufficient amount of the patients. Because one patient does not mean anything. So we had about 30 patients in each group. It means that we had a really sufficient amount of patients to make the mean, to make the conclusion. Now you can see here, placement, delivery, 1 year follow-up. Yeah, and with low thigh base and with high thigh base. And if I look at the numbers, there is also one additional thing which the study brings, a very important. So let me better go directly here. So those are numbers after delivery of the restoration. So we put the restoration and made the X-ray. So in this case, we had 0.73 millimeters around short thigh base and 0.82 around high thigh base. However, after 1 year follow-up, you see in both groups, we had a significant reduction of the bone. So the bone, as you saw in the X-rays, really sometimes really grew to really close the implant. And this, after 1 year follow-up, that was significantly better. So first of all, let's take a look at this. After delivery T1, again, there was no difference between high and low thigh bases. And after 1 year follow-up, you see from 0.73, it was reduced to 0.6. And yeah, this is really what happened. So this study not only tells that thigh base height, if its implant is placed at the level of the bone, is really not important. It really proves the principle of bone remineralization, that the bone can come back if you have sufficient height of the tissues and if the implant, again, has the design which is good for zero bone loss concepts. In this case, as I said, we had sufficient connection stability, no polished surface, and platform switching that allowed the bone really to come back. Same happened, and even more significantly, with tall thigh base group. You see from 0.82, we had a reduction for 0.45. So twice the bone got better twice. So you see, this is delivery. This is the same case after 1 year. It just bone grew. Again, why? As I said, sufficient tissue thickness because the patients are in figure type. Also, implant properties, factors which allow this remineralization. So we made the conclusion from the study that we really do not have this magic number for the tie base that you need to follow. It's not like thin like tissue thickness where we really do have that number for. It depends, first of all, on implant position. If the implant is placed at the level of the bone and you have thick tissues, 4 millimeters, 3.5 millimeters, then you can use whatever base you want. The difference between using low and high tie base really will make sense when we'll talk about prosthetic material. We'll talk about, for example, zirconia, because if I am using low tie base, it means that I can have more zirconia below the tissues. And if I'm using higher tie base, it means less zirconia. So again, look, we go back to this idea that you cannot isolate the factor like tie base height and say, look, this is most important. You need to have 2 millimeters because you're going to lose bone. No, that's not true, depending on the implant position. Now, if the implant goes deeper, surely the deeper implant is placed, the more tie base height is important. So if this implant would be, I don't know, 1 millimeter below the bone, surely I'm not going to use low tie base. I'm going to use higher tie base. And if it even goes deeper, then the height of tie base becomes increasingly important. So first of all, as I said, look at it from the implant position point of view, where the implant is placed. And what I really liked about, because I watched all the previous presentation, that bone profiling, bone profiler is a magical tool. Because, for example, you place implant 2 millimeters below the bone, you take profiler, you remove that bone which is above the neck of the implant, and you can use low tie base. Without bone profiling, you would need to use higher tie base. Because the problem is that if the implant is below the bone, you can damage the bone which is above the implant. That's why tie base is important, not for any other reason. Anyway, I am really happy to say, as I already mentioned, that it's published in the best American journal, and I think this is the first publication, right, with NucleOSS implants in this highest level of evidence. And I think that it really puts a good evidence-based work further. Now, we talked about tie base height, so inevitably it's very connected to the prosthetic material. What I'm gonna glue on that tie base, what kind of material. That's why I'm gonna finish up my presentation talking about subgingival materials for implant reconstructions. I divide the materials on purpose into big groups. Material which goes below the tissues may need one type of features, and the other material, which is for occlusion or for aesthetics, it needs completely different qualities. But before we go here, remember this picture when we talked about vertical tissue thickness. Now we're gonna look at it from prosthetic point of view, because we're gonna see the same video, everything the same, only we're gonna discuss how prosthetic material influences that adhesion or creation of the clean zone. Because just having vertical tissue thickness, it's not enough. Okay, as I say, vertical tissue thickness is a possibility to get crestal bone stability. How we gonna use it depends on the implant prosthetic material. On the prosthetic, not implant, on prosthetic material. What material do we have here? Is it titanium? Is it zirconia? Is it glazed surface? Because on choice of these materials, we can influence strength of the adhesion, how strong the tissues glue to the surface of prosthetics, and also extension of adhesion. Apparently, it differs. Some materials have better gluing, but some materials spread more on the surface. Ideal material would be strong, and also that the cells would glue all over that material to give the protection to the implant. That's, I think, the ideal adhesion. Take a look at this picture. So this is the implant. You don't see sulcus, angulation. So implant tooth, we can see a little bit inflammation on the canine, like in the sulcus. But in the implant, you won't be able to probe. If you would try to probe this implant, you will need to tear the tissues. You should pack the probe inside. That is the, I think, ideal material, what should be we're looking for. Now, so several years ago, I did a systematic review when we compared zirconia abutments with titanium abutments, because again, we need some evidence to say which material is better and which material is worse. The outcome of the systematic review said that there is no difference in the materials except that you have better pink aesthetic score around zirconia restorations. What is pink aesthetic score? And pink aesthetic score is a very powerful measurement. Actually, this is the only measurement which can objectively say the quality of the tissues around different prosthetic materials. It includes like presence of distal and mesial papilla, like profile of the restoration, margin of the tissue. So all those things are combined into one measurement. And then you have 7 measurements. If the best ideal situation would be 14 if you double it by 2. So that study really said that tissues around zirconia are significantly better compared to any other material. So maybe that's the material we should be using, because it is obvious that the reaction of the tissues is different. Now here you can have zirconia, you can see tissues look like glued to the surface. Here you have another material which doesn't look that nice. These pictures tell us so much, because here what you can see, it's not blood. It's remnants of the tissues. When I removed the restoration from the implant, this was the integration of the tissues to the zirconia, and you can see that it's part of the tissue still remained, remnants of the tissues on the restoration. While in the other material, this is glaze material, you can find remnants of the breakfast, not remnants of the tissue. So look how it's different. That's why when we talk about perimplantitis, if we do not include prosthetic material, it doesn't give us complete picture. In perimplantitis, we talk about what? Implant surface, hygienic habits of the patient. Is the patient perio or not perio involved? What about prosthetic material? Look how it's different. You have tissues or you have plaque. So of course, our choices as prosthodontists is crucial to have that protection further, not just development by having thick tissues, but making it really protective by the choice of our materials. I'm going to discuss now a little bit about zirconia, how I think why this material should be probably the best choice. And we all have, I always say this, in our practices, in our career as clinicians, some cases when you performed better than you expected. Something happened and then you see that it's better than you thought. This is one of the cases when I got the result, and it taught me really to look more at zirconia as material. Very simple situation, single implant. Here you can see individual zirconia abutment. At that time, I was still doing cemented restorations. Now I'm 99% do screw retained. Now in this case, I would do just screw retained restoration, that's all. Well, but we change with time. So the plan was making zirconia and then zirconia porcelain crown, like on teeth. This is what was done. You see abutment, and you see the crown was cemented on this zirconia abutment. And for checkup, patient comes, and I see this white line. I'm picking up the Explorer, the probe, and I try to remove it, thinking that this is semen remnant, which I was not able to remove. But I slowly realized that this is not a cement, this is supragingival margin on individual individual prosthetic abutment. I just made it unintentionally higher. Now I would do that intentionally, because we all know that if you cannot see the margin, you won't be able to clean the cement. But anyway, so is it good? Is it bad? What to do? So I said to the patient, okay, let's wait. Because when you don't know what to do, you always say, let's wait. And patient comes after half a year, and this gap disappeared. Now, if you don't remember, it looked like this before. This is after half a year. So the tissues just grew, and they closed it. But the question I'm asking, not why did it close, not why did it grow, why did it stop? Why didn't it grow like to the middle of the restoration? Because if it can grow like this, what could stop the tissues of growing there? The point is that, of course, the prosthetic materials are different. So that's why, again, our choice is important. What we place below the tissues, what kind of material. Again, another example. This is this case after, I think, 10 or more years follow-up. Now take a look at those tissues. Now, this implant was never probed. I go back. Never. In 10 years, not a single probing, not a single subgingival cleaning with superfloss, only interproximal spaces with interdental brush. So apparently, this is different. And the tissue behavior really depends on what we give to those tissues. And they can really grow if we give the right material. It can really grow, close our black triangles, and result in more aesthetic appearance. Maybe that's what we should be always using. I'm thinking, if it's a magic material, if it's zirconia magic material, why don't we use it all the time? Of course, there is no any magic. There's always a reason behind. There are 4 things we need to know about zirconia to understand what was happening in those cases which I showed. Structure, polishability, bacterial adhesion, and cell adhesion. We walk through all these features to give the answer why tissues around zirconia behave like this. I'm starting with the structure. Zirconia is very dense, but I'm not looking it as like a strong material. I'm looking from the smoothness point of view. It means that I can polish it very smoothly, because by polishing, I'm not gonna open new layers. Try to polish ceramics. It's impossible. Once you think it's smooth, you suddenly open new pores and not even surface. Bacterial adhesion. Did you know that zirconia is the only material which does not attract the plague? In other words, it is the least plague-attractive material. Studies by Scarano et al., they looked at the same smoothness of titanium plates and zirconia plates, and they found that on zirconia they have much, much, much less bacteria and plague. What should be thinking right away? Remember plague zone, adherence zone? So if there is material which inheritedly does not attract the plague, I take it, because that's what I want to have. A high adhesion zone, lower plague zone. Fibroblast adhesion or migration on the zirconia is also a very controversial issue, because actually we do not have contact with fibroblasts to zirconia. Now you heard it correctly. When I put Ti-base with zirconia restoration on the implant, there is no fibroblasts in contact with zirconia. So we might think then, okay, so why do we need all those studies if actually there is no contact between those materials when we place the implant? Now keep this in mind. I will come back to this statement just in 5 minutes. As I mentioned, that I look structure point of view to polishability. It means that with polishing tools, I can smoothen zirconia from a rough surface like here, when it comes from the milling center, to the smooth surface, mirror-like surface over here. We have the protocol. We know what happens with the smoothness of zirconia with each step. The question, of course, is, do we need that? Because from here to here takes two things. One is time, the other is money. When you ask clinician to polish zirconia, after 1 week, you will get the call, doc, we need to talk about money, because it takes more time and it's more difficult. So there must be really a reason why I want super polished zirconia. And I just jump ahead and I will say that I'm using super polished zirconia for 8 years or even more. And I have only good observations. Some of them I'm gonna show you now. There are studies, of course, who say that not only we have better pink aesthetic score around zirconia, we also have less probing depth. Because I'm thinking that if I have less probing depth around any kind of material, it means that I have better protection. This is the study which says that if you probe around zirconia and implant and titanium, you will have less probing depth around zirconia restoration. And this is very powerful study. You know why? Look at the design. It's split mouth. One part is zirconia, the other is titanium, and the probing depth is really perpendicular to the abutment. It means that I can really probe that completely reliable. So I would say that I would always go for super smooth zirconia, but to finalize the understanding why we need it, we need to talk about fibroblasts. Remember when I told that actually we do not have contact of fibroblast to zirconia when you put the restoration? So what the zirconia has contact to if it's not fibroblasts? Remember this ideally developed per implant integration? Then there is no difference, even looks better around implant than the tooth. The question could be answered if we would inspect those cells. Because sometimes when you have this kind of restoration, remember you have tie base, you have polished zirconia, and you have porcelain. If I am putting that to the implant, it means that polished zirconia goes below the tissues, and when I remove it, I have particles of the tissues adhering to the surface. So what kind of cells would really answer me how my protection works? And there is one study in Belgium where really they looked at it. They took these identical restorations like here with titanium base, with polished zirconia and porcelain. They submerged it to the implants, and then after half a year removed. After removal, they noticed that there is some tissues on titanium base and zirconia, and then they inspect what kind of tissues. So starting with titanium base, they found fibroblasts. So there were fibroblasts on titanium, like a ring on the finger. They just circled all around titanium base. But when they looked further on zirconia, there was no any single fibroblast. Why? Because it's epithelium cells which protect our implant, not fibroblasts. Epithelium cells glue to the surface, and the other side, they glue to the surface of fibroblasts or connective tissue. But the contact, the intimate contact, the first line of defense comes from epithelium cells. And zirconia, remember, is the smoothest material. For epithelium, the smoother the better. So that's why super smooth zirconia is good, because epithelium will glue better to that surface. Even more interesting, when they inspected glazed part of the restoration, porcelain and glaze, they found no fibroblasts and no epithelium. That's why to make a glazed restoration is the worst you can do for your implant. Even if you have thick tissues vertically, if the restoration is glazed and it's connected to the implant, it means that epithelium will not attach to that surface, fibroblast will not attach to the surface, and you will have the pocket. Schematically, again, let's repeat it because it's so important. That's, again, how we connect everything together. We place the implant. 1 to 1.5 millimeter above the bone will be connective tissue, scar-like tissue without any vessels. They just go all around the tie base contact with the implant. If we go up, then you have junctional epithelium, which lines the surface of zirconia and no contact with the fibroblasts. The fibroblasts really go to the side, and direct contact goes through the epithelium and the hemidesmosomes structures. Once you understand that epithelium is the key to protect our implant for adhesion, then surely the use of metal ceramics or glazed surfaces becomes a disadvantage. Like here, delivery picture, you can see what's happening with the tissues. 1 year follow-up, 3 year follow-up, we see opening of the sulcus, we see bleeding, and you can probe that implant completely because there is no adhesion. Why is that happening? Because we have porcelain below the tissues. So that's, I think, one of the most important key take-home messages, that choice of prosthetic material for long-term follow-up, for long-term stability, is as important as implant design. This is how adhesion looks on the zirconia. Look, you don't see the sulcus. This is how adhesion looks on the glazed material. You can really probe it. You can see the tissues are raising, fluctuating. So surely there won't be any possibility to have a protection. This is a very cool image. Look how zirconia looks under magnification, and look how glaze looks under magnification. Once we know that protection, first line of defense is epithelium, so for epithelium, zirconia is much, much better to adhere than rough surface of the glazed material. So that's why I would say that polishing of zirconia, as far as I understand, as far as we did research, is really a good decision to make, and we can really have better adaptation of the tissues, which later will lead to less inflammation, less bone loss, and much better outcome in general. So zirconia, how it comes from the milling center. Now this is medium result, and this is the final result. It looks like glazed surface, right? It shines, but it's not glaze. It's super polished zirconia. What I'm going to show you next is a very new study, which is still not published, when we compared inflammation levels between normal smoothness zirconia and super smooth zirconia. Because again, that's the point of using super smooth zirconia. If we don't have any clinical benefits, so why? Maybe we don't need to use it. We had two groups of the restorations. One was normal smoothness of zirconia, yeah, so we talk about that using zirconia, and the other was super polished zirconia. And we placed those on the implants, and at certain period of time we collected gingival fluid and inspected it for inflammation markers. The outcome showed, you can see here on these graphs. So first of all, we looked around these inflammations in provisional restoration. So the highest inflammation was with provisionals. It really goes to understanding that we should use provisionals as short as possible. Then this was 1 month after delivery of zirconia, and this is 1 year. So you see that declining on inflammation, and also there was difference significantly between rough zirconia and super smooth zirconia. Now, of course, it doesn't directly say that you will have less bone loss, but what does it say? That if I have less inflammation around material, surely in long term, it will give me a much better situation compared to the rougher material. I can say that again, we have now evidence really saying that super smooth zirconia, super polished zirconia to high gloss gives you a better adaptation of the tissues and reduces the inflammation. This surely brings me to one of the last questions I still have some time to address. How to maximize the contact of zirconia to the tissues? If zirconia is so good, let's make it as much contact to the tissues as possible. And it comes again to the lab work that sometimes labs, I don't know about here, but in Lithuania in the past, they were glazing zirconia restorations. So they were designing the cases like that you are leaving zirconia inside and putting porcelain all around the restoration. Why you do that? Because labs were trained to do that around metal ceramics. And although zirconia is different material, they still work on the same pattern. That's wrong. You see that zirconia is really locked inside. You cannot see zirconia here. Everything is glazed till the end. So that's wrong. We should not use that. Similar is also with full anatomical zirconia, because final stage is glazing. So after glazing, they should repolish subgingival part. So subgingival part should be smooth, and glaze should be only on top of our restoration, like this. This is the true zirconia ceramics, or full zirconia restoration, when you see that different colors. You see that there is a polished zirconia for the tissues, and then you have porcelain on top of zirconia. That's the way to expose more zirconia to the tissues and have better adaptation and later less crestal bone loss. Now, quick, just some anecdotal evidence, like, I'm always showing studies, with difficult design. This would like to show you because it's really fun here. Some years ago, we designed a restoration, you can see that, which would combine two ways of thinking. On one side, we had polished part, and on the other, we had glazed part. And I was thinking, if I will attach that restoration to the implant, it means that on one side, I will have better protection, and on the other side, I would have not as good protection. And then you can see here, so this is zirconia, right, polished, and here you have porcelain. And I put those restorations to the implants and then followed up those for 5 years. The patient came back after 5 years. It was interesting to see what we're gonna find. From clinical point of view, there was no any difference. You can see that delivery image and 5 years follow-up. Of course, we see the tissues getting thicker, so ideal soft tissue situation. Now, what about bone? This is delivery X-ray. This is 5 years follow-up. Is there a difference? Maybe no. But maybe if we enlarge here and little bit analyze, that in zirconia I see even bone above the platform, right? You see everything is okay here. Now in glazed restoration, I have this a little bit 0.5 millimeter of bone loss, especially if I would compare it to the delivery X-ray. So I would say that super polished zirconia maybe does not influence directly crestal bone stability, but surely it influences remineralization of the tissues. Because look, here you have bone loss in both sides, and after 5 years, I have full remineralization around zirconia and not complete remineralization around glazed porcelain. So then you begin to understand why you have good long-term follow-up cases. I'm going to show you some 10 years follow-up because, as I said, I'm working with this zirconia for many, many years. One of the first cases you see, again, by the implant design, by prosthetic design, we would probably do differently now. You see white, snow white zirconia, which was the first zirconia which entered the market. And this is the final restorations, delivery, 8 years follow-up. Prosthetic grafting, new term. Almost no keratinized tissues at the delivery. After 8 years, I have sufficient amount. How about bone stability? Placement. At the delivery, I see some demineralization. Just 1 year is enough for the bone to come back, and after 8 years, I see bone getting better. Again, what bone loss? Forget about bone loss if you follow all these guidelines we talked about. In immediate implants, and very nice situation, extraction of the canine, then implant placement and the provisional restoration. I have, again, sufficient height of the tissues. So what? I just do super polished zirconia crown. We have the contour which was maintained by immediate implant placement, deliver the restoration, and I just see, you see, soft tissue improvement with time. You see that this rim above the tissues, above the crown, it's getting thicker. Take a look at the patient hygiene. Doesn't clean teeth, but it doesn't affect. Remember that zirconia is least plaque attractive material, especially when you compare at the delivery and 5 years follow-up. You see, it looks like it was grafted, but not, because I have developed a good seal with epithelium, and then tissues start to grow by themselves. I do not really have a perfect explanation, step by step what's happening, but we see that with the smooth surface, even implant placement like this, which is really deep, compared to the interproximal spaces, is not causing any problems. And again, I could show a lot of these cases, like delivery, some years follow-up. You see the tissues are thicker. It reflects on the bone stability. Now, this case, I like this the most. 2 implants. Now, here we definitely need keratinized tissues. So sometimes I do like this. First of all, we'll make the restoration, and then I know the exact position of the margin, and afterwards I'm making keratinized tissues. But once we made the restoration, patient did not come for this procedure. The patient came after half a year, like this. No grafting. So who would graft now? So that's the power of zirconia when you use it in a correct way, when you use all other things. Look, lack of the tissues after just 1 year. Growth of the tissues. No grafting. I don't have any reason to lie to you. Why should I? So that's really the power of zirconia. And this slide, I would like you to take picture, because that's how I look at the biocompatibility of materials. Ceramics or glazed is the worst, because epithelium does not glue to the surface. You will have the pocket. Emax something intermediate because Emacs can be smoother, but lacks this natural properties of least flag attraction. Zirconia is the best from all the sides: polishing, least flag attraction, epithelial attachment. Now, what about titanium? So, of course, titanium develops adhesion to epithelium. However, it is less strong than adhesion to zirconia. And from other side, we did not really test titanium so much. So that's why I think that still zirconia would be my choice number one. Well, we come back to the first and the last question. Which factor is most important? Maybe zirconia now. So we just keep on changing. So I say that it's not any of them. It's how factors relate to each other. I call you to really look at crystal bone stability as a basket of apples. Each apple represents different factor. In studies, we take out apple to research it. It means we must isolate other apples, but after that, we are putting it back because that is really the key to crystal bone stability around our implants. And I also want to take a chance or possibility to tell you about, in May, with Dental Campus, we're making a big 2 days conference, full 2 days courses with zero bone loss concepts, delayed and immediate. So I just, how to say, scratched a little bit today the surface, especially around immediates. We have full day lectures, and Dental Campus agreed to give you, as NucleOSS users, special discount of 25%. So if you use that code, if you take a cameras and make a picture of QR code, it will really lead you directly to the website, and you will be able really to get more knowledge of zero bone loss concepts. With this, I want to thank you for your kind attention. And do we still have time for the questions? Yes. So let's take 5 questions. Okay, 5 questions because we need to prepare this for the party, right? So
Misafirlerimiz 5 soru alabiliyoruz. Soru sormak isteyen ekibimiz varsa hemen yardımcı olalım. Bir mikrofon alabilir miyiz?
okay.
Thank you for all of it. How can we use zirconia crown on the all-on-6?
The same way, all on 6. So zirconia is, you have the framework, which is polished, and you even have the polished part in interproximal spaces. I mean, with pontics as well. So that's way to use it, because for implant protection is important, the implant part.
But it can be broken.
Yeah, but then you can make this this bar, right? But the bar of titanium doesn't go into the implant part. It goes only, interproximally in the pontic. So it's also depends on the lab. When I also do like this zirconia like that on full arch cases as well.
Thank you.
Yes, I hear you. Mm-hmm.
How can can we polish zirconia? Which instruments?
So it's not possible now to explain it like now because it's really a process. We used Ceraglaze instruments and final step was polishing paste, but there is a sequence which is you start from the rougher, fine, superfine, and polished paste at the end.
Thank you.
Öncelikle teşekkür ederim. Çok güzel bir sunum. 1 milimetre olan diş eti boyutunu 4 milimetreye nasıl çıkaracağız? Orayı tam anlamadım. Augmentasyon dediniz, yumuşak doku augmentasyonu. Kısaca bir şey yapabilir misiniz, anlatabilir misiniz?
So it's I usually use two methods. If I have sufficient bone height, I just place implant deeper. So if you have 1 millimeter, I can place implant 3 millimeters below the bone. The other way, if I do not want to go that deep or I don't have bone because of the nerve, then I do vertical soft tissue augmentation with soft tissue graft or soft tissue substitute. You put on the vertically on bone the graft and suture. That's why you are increasing tissues vertically.
Teşekkürler.
Okay, two more questions.
What will be subject of occlusion? Does it have any effect on the implant?
I don't consider occlusion, if it's normal occlusion like teeth, a cause for bone loss. So that's why you didn't hear any word about occlusion. Of course, if you have like extensive cantilever, or you make the contact only one on implant and other teeth do not occlude, you might have, first of all, you will have some technical problem which might lead to bone loss. But like if it's normal occlusion, so it doesn't really affect bone loss. Further, the occlusion might stimulate the bone growth because the implant is loaded and load is distributed to the bone. Okay. So the last question, and there's one over there.
Hello. First of all, thank you for this wonderful presentation and all the information you share with us. My question is that, what about the thicker tissues, more than 5 or 6 millimeter? Would we cut it off, or is it okay to do it like this way?
Very good question, thank you. It depends on, first of all, is it immediate or is it delayed? In delayed, I would say 5 millimeter is the top. If it's more, you need to cut it off for two reasons. One is it's very inconvenient to work. I mean, how to take impression, and it always bleeds, so it's really, you need always anesthetize the patient. It's just not convenient. And the other reason is that if you have very thick tissues, more than 5, there is some studies which show that you have more anaerobic microflora inside. And some say that if you have anaerobes, there is a possibility to have perimplantitis. But if it's an immediate, so sometimes that, thickness comes very, very deep. Like if you measure from interproximal space to the implant, sometimes it could be, even 6, 7, 8, 10 millimeters. So in immediate, apparently tissues form differently. And my suggestion would be, if you use zirconia, you are really on the safe side because you will have a good, strong epithelial attachment. It's different from teeth because on teeth, epithelium attaches on cementum, which is rough. That's why it's not stable. That's why it's different from the implant, because you can have smooth surface and then the implant can be relatively deeper than it's recommended now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, again, thank you.
Değerli misafirlerimiz, yeni şeyler söylemek lazım mottosuyla yola çıktığımız 8. Diş Hekimleri toplantımızın, organizasyonumuzun toplantı ayağı son bulmuştur. Fakat saat 9.30'da Melek Mossa'nın katılımlarıyla sizleri tekrar bu alanda partimize bekliyoruz. Ama sizler ayrılmadan önce sizlerin huzurunda tekrar izin verirseniz değerli konuşmacı hocalarıma teşekkür etmek isterim. Sayın Doktor Tolga Pekperdahçı, alkışlarınızla. Sayın Profesör Doktor Doruk Koçyiğit, alkışlarınızla. Teşekkür ederiz. Ve Sayın Profesör Doktor Tomas Linkevicius. Değerli misafirlerimiz, sizler tüm gün boyunca kıymetli alkışlarınızla bizleri onurlandırdınız. NucleOSS ailesi için, bizler için en büyük alkış sizlere. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz değerli katılımlarınız için. İyi ki varsınız.